Great, great. This is my favorite lecture. Next week will be my next favorite lecture, but right, this is my favorite lecture that I do to this class because it's really close to my heart. What I'm going to be talking to you about, which is probably the most charismatic animal on this planet, from my perspective anyway. Before I get started, quick question. How many of you tried out any of the 3 assignments I asked you to consider doing? Oh, great. Let me ask, what did you do?
I eat breakfast tonight. That's what I was doing.
How did you feel? What easy? You didn't feel good. What happened to your body?
I had a lot of trouble focusing.
Concentration, right. Anyone else? Any other thing other than not eating? Anybody else try any of the other things? Yeah?
Yeah, I met a person from a completely different background.
Okay, how was that?
It was interesting.
Yeah?
Yeah, but I feel it's something I do on a regular basis anyway.
Okay. Okay. Nobody else met somebody from a very different background? Or did anyone else? It's quite a challenge, isn't it? It's quite a personal challenge to do that. What was the third thing I asked everyone to do?
Oh, I was just saying, I was talking with an environmental activist from Nigeria. The phone, I guess it's very different.
Great, so you've got to hear different perspectives. Come on, what was the third thing I asked everyone to do?
Energy stuff.
Oh yeah, anybody try to reduce your carbon footprint? Nobody tried? Oh my god. I tried to avoid plastic. I couldn't avoid it. Everywhere I went, I kept getting stuff put into plastic bags. Everything you buy, every fork is plastic. I found it actually really hard. So anyway, that was my experience. Before I get into this topic, which really excites me, we're going to start with a clicker question.
Press the power button. Press A.
Right. Okay, we're done. All right, 64% said extremely important. 33% said moderately important. 1% said not important. Or it's too late anyway. Okay, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. So how many do we have?
I just appreciate reading it.
Okay. The reason why I love elephants is because they are actually very much like human beings. They live in families. They are ruled by the females. Sorry, Steve. They have a social structure that we can relate to very easily. It makes them a great species to create global engagement and relatedness. They have a brain more than 3 times larger than ours and longer neurons than ours. That means they have a phenomenal capacity for memory. So everything you hear about an elephant never forgets is absolutely true. They use their brain to map their vast landscapes over which they travel every single year. And also, of course, they use their brain in all their social interactions. These are incredibly compassionate, social, tactile animals. They have the world's longest nose. Not surprising, they have a phenomenal sense of smell, something like 40 times more than a dog. They have the world's biggest ears that allows them to hear each other from huge, huge distances. If we were a group of elephants here in Bristol, which I can't remember the name of, and there was another group of elephants at Princeton Junction, they'd be able to hear us. They'd be able to hear us, they'd be able to know who's speaking, and they'd know what to say. They actually have their own form of language. They are so intelligent that they can even tell if you're speaking a language from a tribe that is a friendly tribe versus a tribe that is a dangerous tribe. And of course, because they're able to communicate, they can tell each other when there's danger approaching. They are, as I said, very tactile. They live in family groups and they stay in their family groups for life, except the male. So the females, the grandmothers, mothers, and all the daughters all stay together for their entire lives. They live till about 75. and they take care of each other. So aunts and sisters take care of each other's children, or baby calves. The most famous study of elephants anywhere in the world is in Kenya. It's in a place called Amboseli. And these elephants have been studied for the last 45 years. That's not even the lifetime of one single elephant. Every elephant in that population is known by name. They live in family groups. This is the QB family. They're named after the alphabet. This is Kumquat. She's the matriarch. Her daughter Kwei behind her. Underneath Kwei is her son, Q-Tip, because there are only so many names you can get from letter Q. And behind her is Quintilla. And underneath Quintilla is Kwanzaa. Kwanzaa is Kumquat's youngest calf. So a female elephant will continue to breed until she's in her 50s, and then she'll enter into menopause. She'll become a grandmother, and she'll continue playing a very important role in that family for decades. This photograph was taken by an American photographer. His name is Nick Grant. The family is actually standing out in the sun in Amboseli. They're actually sleeping. That's how they sleep, often standing up. Sometimes the calves will lie down. And Kumquat became extremely famous through these photographs. Her whole family being seen from a very close perspective because of Nick's unique way of documenting elephants and actually bringing to the world this incredible awe about these amazing animals. This was on the 31st of October in 2010. The very next day, Kumquat was gunned down together with Kwei and Quintilla. In fact, the whole family was annihilated in one day. Baby Kwanzaa, who was only 2 years old and didn't have any tusks, wasn't worth wasting a bullet on. And so she was left by the police. And Kwanzaa was found standing next to her aunt, basically weeping over the death of her aunt. Well, the elephant poaching epidemic is something that is annihilating elephants across the continent. We have lost something like 75% of Tanzania's elephants in the last 5 years alone. The bulls carry the largest tusks, but they are the ones often targeted. What's interesting is that, as I said, the bulls leave the family when they're only about 14. Here is a bull who's been killed. They join bachelor herds and they live out in the bush together until they're old enough to breed, which isn't until they are 30 years old. Those bulls are probably in their 20s. The slaughter of bulls means that actually a huge part of their genetic material is being eliminated just by poaching and covering of the bulls because of their larger tusks. And these bulls are so compassionate, they will stay and hang around the dead elephant, and they even try to help it out if they're not sure what's happened, they're confused, which puts them in greater danger because they are then going to be gunned down themselves. And probably the most profound moment for Kenya when it really created a global impression was the death of Satao. Satao was probably the biggest elephant in the world. He lived in a part of Savo, and his name, Satao, reflected the place where he came from, so he was not known. His name was never said. Nobody even knew he existed, except the scientists who studied him. Satao was gunned down, and the next day I posted this on my blog in The Guardian, and I got over 100,000 shares of that blog post, and hundreds of thousands of comments. Global grieving for an elephant that people didn't even know, had never heard of before he died. So the poaching of elephants started to erupt in about 2009 as a result of the legal sale of ivory from 4 southern African countries under a CITES agreement. That sale led to a rise in poaching that occurred all the way up. Every year we saw more and more poaching. Kenya got listed in the Gang of 8. That's the gang of the 8 most notorious countries in the world responsible or complicit in poaching and trafficking in ivory. The port of Mombasa, Kenya's main port, was considered the worst port in the world for the movement of ivory. So a lot of the ivory which was leaving Kenya, which was assessed for its DNA, showed that it wasn't even Kenyan ivory. It was ivory coming from the Congo, from Sudan, from Tanzania, Gabon, and many other countries. And Kenya's ivory stockpile. So every time ivory was seized, it was put into a stockpile, which is a massive vault underneath the headquarters of the Kenya Wildlife Service. And that stockpile was full to the limit. The ivory was literally to the ceilings. And that meant that ivory could no longer be stored in those places. It also meant That some ivory disappeared from those vaults, nobody noticed, because it literally was just a massive mountain of ivory lying down there. So, as an organization, we decided that we would take action. I did my PhD on elephants. My chairman of my organization, Richard Leakey, was also famous for his work on elephants. So we decided that this was an issue that we could take up on a national level as conservationists to make all Kenyans aware and become part of a campaign to end the poaching, the slaughter of elephants in our country. Our campaign is called Hands Off Our Elephants. It basically says they are our elephants first. Of course, they are a global heritage, but they are our elephants. And anybody who threatens them is basically going to be in trouble. So the first thing we did was examine what everyone else was doing. We found that most organizations were doing phenomenal work on the ground, boots on the ground, basically anti-poaching work. And nobody was looking at what happens next. So when you do anti-poaching work, really what you're trying to do is arrest the poachers, get them brought to justice. So we looked at the justice system, what's really going on in the justice system. In Kenya, what we saw was over 2,000 arrests of poachers every single year. There were 70% of the case files in the courts in the country were missing or lost. Some people in different courts were being charged with ivory crimes, but the different courts didn't know that they were the same people. So our courts operate independently of each other and they don't communicate with each other. So there's no crime offenders list in the country. And 78% of the people who were arrested and actually were tried to conclusion pleaded guilty in the end, paid a fine. The maximum fine at the time was $400. Most people didn't get the maximum fine. In fact, most of them got a fine of maybe $100, $200. And one guy who had been responsible for poaching elephants, his penalty was to cut the grass at the sheep's office. So that's how it was being treated. So while the conservation organizations were all up in arms about the poaching, and let's get the poachers and let's stop the traffickers, actually the court system, the magistrates, the prosecutors, the police, were not treating this as a very serious problem. For them, it was just one of the many crimes that take place in the country. Fewer than 4% of the people who were convicted actually went to jail. So we concluded that we had lenient penalties, poor case management because of all the loss of all those files, and we were failing to use the full force of the law. You cannot move container loads of ivory across any country in the world without being part of a network. In fact, trafficking of ivory and other wildlife products is a global problem. It's being driven by criminal cartels that are international, so that makes them organized crime. So we declared the situation a national disaster. Just by declaring it a national disaster and asking the public to join us, rose and elevated the problem to the level of the government. We were very concerned that we were saying this was at the scale of a national drought or famine or national tragedy. We took our findings to very high levels of the government. We went to the head of the Office of the Public Prosecution. This is Kariako Tobiko. This is the man who's responsible to make sure that trials are being conducted properly, or the prosecution is being done properly. What we found is that most prosecutors actually didn't study wildlife crime in their courses. They were mostly concerned about other kinds of crimes. And we also found that when it comes to the judiciary, so the court system, the magistrates themselves didn't really understand that these were serious problems. I actually sat in a court where a magistrate was puzzling over this problem of this Vietnamese man. He had 2 suitcases full of ivory, and he was clearly guilty, there's no question. These were his suitcases. He wasn't denying that. He said, but I'm just taking a gift home to my mom. And this magistrate was like, okay, so he's guilty, so what do we do with this guy? He was in transit, he wasn't in Kenya, he was actually at the airport. And so she said, well, where did this ivory come from? We're like, we don't know. I mean, he was flying in from Kinshasa, from the Congo. She said, so it's not Kenyan ivory. Those were not Kenyan elephants. And she gave him a very lenient penalty, and the man got on a plane and took off. And that really made us realize how serious the problem was that our own judiciary didn't understand. So we went to Parliament, we spoke with our lawmakers in the country, and we demanded that the legislation get changed. In order to win public support and understanding of what's happening, we also went to the newsrooms. We went on radio, we went on television, we challenged our own government, which was not very easy, considering that the Wildlife Authority in Kenya is very much a paramilitary force. You can see that the representative of the Wildlife Service came in his full uniform. He probably had a gun somewhere. And in these debates, we were being actually accused of being some of the, maybe the troublemakers, that we were painting a bad picture of Kenya. We weren't painting the good picture. Kenya is this wonderful haven for wildlife where tourists should all come. But probably the most important moment during our campaign was when we identified a certain individual. His name is Faisal Mohammed Ali, one of the biggest poaching criminals in the country. He was involved in the trafficking of tons and tons of ivory, thousands of elephants that had been killed. Faisal had been named in a case, a warrant for his arrest had been issued, but he was walking about freely in town. The police did not arrest him. So we went straight to the chief of police. So this is, I'm not sure what the equivalent is in America. There must be like the most senior police person in the entire country. And we said to him, we want to talk to you about this problem. And what we had, it was World Elephant Day, we had a poster saying the price of ivory is life imprisonment, because that is what the law says. If you're if you're caught with ivory, or if you're arrested for threatening an elephant or any other endangered species, the penalty is life imprisonment, or a fine of $200,000. So we had this big poster, and we had $1,000 that we wanted to offer as a reward for the arrest of Faisal, because we really needed one big win to conclude our case. The chief of police listened to me. Well, first he didn't let me in his office. I had to wait for 8 hours. And I created a lot of social media interest by tweeting from his waiting room about, he's 2 hours late, he's 3 hours late, and this went on and on. And finally, I just pushed my way into his office, which he wasn't very happy about. And I just said, look, I've just need 5 minutes. I want to give you this poster, I want to offer you this reward. Here's a petition. We had 400 signatures on a petition. And these were not just ordinary people on the streets. These were people from big industries, the captains of industry who had signed a petition saying, we want to offer a reward for the arrest of Faisal, because he threatens the elephants of the country. Chief of police listened to me, took the petition which is in his hand, and threw it on the table. And he started pointing his finger at me, shouting at me for being a poacher myself, saying, you people are troublemakers, you conservationists, you're making things worse, you're probably killing these elephants yourselves because all you want to do is raise money. And he went on and on and on like this. He didn't realize I had camera crew with me. I don't know how he failed to see them. They were filming the whole thing. And then he stormed out of his office. So we sent the footage to the press room to be and he, in the end, had to kind of back down. Faisal was arrested a few months later. He was actually found, he went on the run, he disappeared underground. We called in Interpol. They were able to find him in Tanzania, where he was hiding out, arrested him, brought him back to Kenya, where he faced a trial. And that trial was really the most important point, I think, in Kenya's conservation history around this issue of poaching. His trial took a whole year. During that time, evidence went missing, people got threatened, witnesses disappeared, all kinds of things happened, which, if we make a film about it, you'll just say that can't possibly be true. An entire building was destroyed overnight after the magistrate was changed, because the new magistrate said, I want to go to the scene of crime. So through this process, every single day was like our hearts in our mouth. What is this guy going to do next? He is behind bars, but his network is out there because they're very active. In the end, he was jailed, and I'll talk about that in a minute. One of the reasons why this campaign was so successful is because we had the phenomenal support and leadership of Kenya's First Lady, Margaret Kenyatta. When she saw what we were doing and the challenges we were facing, she called me to her office and said, okay, what can I do to help? This is the very first lady anywhere in the world to take up an animal called livestock and put her name behind it. Most First Ladies who work with children, women's rights, and that kind of thing. Well, Margaret Kenyatta decided that she was going to support elephants. She came with us to the field, she started publishing articles in the newspaper, she became associated with everything that we were trying to do to save these amazing elephants. We also enlisted other support, for example, hip-hop artists like Giuliani, who made a very amazing song about an elephant that he met while he was in the field with us. And we worked with PR companies, powerful messages that people could really align themselves to. As this campaign rolled out, we actually evolved the messages as we went along. And then we invited anybody who's interested to join us in the streets of Nairobi. Every year we have 3,000 to 4,000 people join us for a 15-kilometer march on the Global March for Elephants, Rhinos, and Lions. in order to demand certain actions from our government to protect these animals. We started holding workshops with children, listening to their views and involving them in conservation. We went to communities that did the same thing. And we started to work with corporates as well. So one of the biggest challenges that we face in Africa around conservation is it's very, very difficult to fund these kinds of campaigns. Most organizations say, you know what you should be doing is, you should be out there, you know, let's see those actual elephants you're saving. Let's see the baby elephants. How many baby elephants are you guys adopting? I said, no, we don't do that. We're actually taking criminals to jail. It's very hard for people to get their heads around that that is also conservation. And we enlisted people from the tourism industry, like Safari Link, who carry our stickers on all their aircraft and in all their waiting rooms. So these are the things that we were able to achieve. New legislation with very, very severe bond terms as well as sentences, huge fines. The files which were disappeared in the courts have all reappeared, and that's been an amazing impact on the whole judicial system, not just wildlife trials. And of course, probably what everybody wants to know is, so what happened to the poaching? Well, after Faisal was jailed, poaching actually began to decline very significantly. Kenya is the only country in Africa that has seen a massive decline in poaching by 90% since 2013. So that's really, really significant. And of course, then we destroyed all the ivory, which was filling those vaults underground, as a statement to say that our elephants are not valuable for their ivory, which some countries think ivory is, because our elephants are worth more alive. So how did we do this? Well, we're an organization that is a conservation organization with very few ecologists like me. Most of my team are lawyers. This is Judy. Her job is to go to the courts throughout the country and actually document what's happening in every single wildlife trial. There are 120 courts in Kenya. Mary, in this picture, is using a digital app. So we created an app which could be on a phone or a tablet, that you can actually document every single case file. So all these documents are now available in a digital form. That means no single judge can say the file is missing or misplaced. That allows us to do real-time analysis. It allows us to intervene when cases are going the wrong way, which is the first time this has ever happened. But it also allows us to have an offenders database. That means that if somebody is arrested in Nairobi and they're also wanted in a case in Mombasa, those two courts will know about it. So that directly affects not only the bail terms but also the sentencing. So it's all good. Our elephants are happy. This is Tim. He is a 50-year-old bull in Amboseli, lives on the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro. Is he safe? Well, no. It isn't the only part of the story. I don't know if you all know that Obama came to Kenya a few years ago. And when he was there, we had this phenomenal opportunity to talk to him, and he asked us, what was going on. Well, the poaching is a big part of it. This is not something that you can solve in Kenya alone. One of the things that we asked Obama to do was to look at the problem of poaching as a global problem, that America has a very important role to play. In fact, while China is the largest market of ivory in the world, the USA is number 2. And so we asked him to treat wildlife crimes as seriously as they do drugs crimes. And actually within 2 weeks, he declared that that was going to happen. And more funding was made available for elephant conservation. So there are just 4 things that I think we should actually be doing. First, we should permanently eliminate the global demand for ivory, closing all the domestic and international markets for ivory and penalizing countries that don't do it. We need a lot of public awareness because the demand for ivory is actually a cultural thing for most of Asia and the Asian diaspora here in the US and in other places. Implement effective deterrents to stop the poaching and trafficking. So that includes better laws, but it's not just the laws. You've got to actually catch people. And we need the public to be able to provide information when there are criminals out there. Africans need to take the lead on African issues. So this is a really important point that we can't stress enough. African presidents have to be seen to be taking the lead, but also local Africans have to take pride in wildlife in order to move away from the ideas that, you can just sell it. Why don't we sell it? It doesn't matter to me. I've never been in the park anyway. We need all Africans to view African wildlife as an important heritage for themselves first. And especially those communities who live in the same landscapes with those animals. And then we must keep up the pressure. The reason why poaching escalated was because a previous ban had worked so well, poaching was down, elephant populations were beginning to increase again, and everyone thought, well, let's try this experiment all over again. knowing very well that the last time it was tried, it had very, very negative effects. But elephants are not just being killed because of their ivory, they're being killed because of other problems as well. Human populations in Africa are increasing dramatically. Elephants are returning to places where they used to go, where they're now seem to be safe, but where people have also started farming and doing other activities. So human-wildlife conflict or human-elephant conflict has begun to emerge as a major problem across Kenya. So here's Tim again. This photograph was taken when I first, no, actually not when I first met him. It was when I first met him with my board. My board from Wildlife Direct came to Amboseli. And we were called, oh, Tim is around, come and see Tim. He's this phenomenal elephant. He is one of the last big tuskers in Africa. If you look carefully on the back of his leg, you'll see kind of a wet mark on his left thigh. He had been speared. So somebody was trying to kill him. They weren't trying to kill him because of his ivory, which you think. It was because he is a notorious crop raider. He's the kind of elephant, if he gets in your farm, there is nothing, but nothing you can do to get him out again. He's huge, he's strong, he's bold, and he has a gang of about 30 bulls that hang out with him now. So he is a threat to people like this. The communities who live around that Amboseli area, pastoralists, women who spend a lot of time out fetching water, collecting firewood, which is an especially dangerous time during the drought. This was last year, earlier this year actually, when the drought had hit a peak. There was far more human-elephant conflict taking place in these kinds of landscapes because animals and people are coming together around very few remaining water sources. And people get injured and killed. This is Nkini. She's a 55-year-old woman, a widow, mother of 8 children. She's alive, but she was almost killed by an elephant two weeks earlier than I took this photograph. So she's in hospital. She's been in hospital for a month. She'll have at least 2 more weeks in hospital, and she's destitute. So this impact of elephants and other wildlife on people is actually causing catastrophic economic shocks to entire families and livelihoods. But in addition, elephants are being killed in retaliation. So in that Amboseli area where we just spent 2 weeks with a Princeton class of undergraduates, we recorded that 15 elephant deaths had been the result of human elephant in 2017. And when you compare that to poaching, which is in blue, you'll see that human conflict is causing far more deaths now than poaching. So we took on a very interesting experiment. We worked together with other organizations, the Wildlife Authority, Save the Elephants, Big Life, and Amboseli Trust for Elephants. We darted Tim, who is one of the most naughtiest of all the elephants, and we put a radio collar on him. So these are just photographs of the operation. You know, the photographs, this particular photograph conceals the fact that it took me a very long time to get these women to come and pose for this photograph. They see elephants all the time, but they have never touched an elephant, and they've never gotten anywhere near as close to an elephant. So they were terrified. But then when they came to the elephants, they started talking about things that they love about elephants. And they say that they value elephants because in their culture, elephants are the cows that are owned by the women. And it stems from all the traditional stories that they've learned from their mothers and grandmothers. One of the women told me that she loves elephants because they're always smiling. Because the way their tusks come out, it means their faces look like they're always smiling. And so I told the story about the collaring of Tim, and why did we put a collar on Tim? Because we want to really attract him. And on the right-hand side, you can see the kind of data we were getting from him. South of that yellow line is wonderful bushland, forest, and woods that elephants love going into. Just north of that line are farms. And you can see what he's doing. He's raiding those farms every night. He's in those farms, eating everyone's crops. As a result of the tracking of Tim, though, we were able to work with the Save the Elephants to produce these maps, heat maps of where Tim goes. And what you can see is he does going into the farms. He spends quite a bit of time in the park, but most of his time outside of the park. And that led to the decisions to put in an electric fence that will actually corral the elephants and keep them out of the farms and away from people, to safeguard not just the elephants but also the forest. So this is a really important demonstration of how the technology of the radio tracking has actually been used directly to help solve this problem for the community. This is what the fence looks like. It costs about $10,000 per kilometer, so it's not cheap. It's something that can't be done by the local community on their own because they're actually poor people who, on average, a family out there might earn $150 a month. So having a $10,000 a kilometer fence is a huge deal. It's a very low fence. It's designed through some very creative thinking that very tall fences are okay, but elephants are super smart, and they can put their tusks in between the wires and they can twine the wires and open up the fences, or they can step on a wooden pole and step between the wires, push it over, or they can do all kinds of other things. We've seen elephants going on their knees and sliding under electric fences. So they're super, super smart. They will figure things out. They're actually, a few of them have figured out this fence already, but this fence is designed to have protruding live wires, which are very flexible. So an elephant only has to get close. He can't actually get up to the fence itself. He only has to get close, get stung by one of those wires. It has 10,000 volts in it. It hurts like hell, but it can't kill an elephant. It can't kill a human being. But it will keep the elephants out of those farms. So the elephants are spending much more time in places like this, on the slopes of Kilimanjaro, out in the bush. Oops. And we did some research as Princeton students last year and this year. So what else can we do? Because some of these farms are still in the elephant landscape, and those fences will only work in certain kinds of areas. So we did some really innovative work on finding solutions. These students were actually exploring the use of chili. So there's a lot of theories that elephants hate chili pepper, and if you put chili pepper on food, that the elephants will avoid it. So the students did this interesting experiment where they put watermelon doused in chili, and they threw it out one side of the car, and then they put watermelon without chili on the other side of the car, and then they went to see what did the elephants actually eat. This photograph reveals just how close you can get to the elephants. These are bulls. In fact, Tim was in that group of elephants. We went and we spent days talking to the local community. This is an elder, one of the biggest landowners in that local area. We had 27 students, and they spread themselves out over the landscape and spoke to different groups of communities, or elders, families, and even children in the schools to try and really understand the problem from their perspective. And this method is called a human-centered approach of design, so that we could come up with solutions that would make sense for local people. We spoke to farmers, many of whom are not from the same tribe as the man you saw earlier or those children you saw earlier. The farmers tend to be short-term workers who come and work on a farm for just 3 months or so. And we asked them how that electric fence had helped them. And we thought they would say something like, well, you know, the crops are still growing and we've got bigger harvest. And they said, now we can sleep at night. I mean, for them, the idea of having to stay up all night meant that in the daytime they were just exhausted and they couldn't actually do their work. We worked with women, which is very unusual in this community. It's a very maternal community. We're mostly ruled by men. Women have very low status. They cannot speak at the same level with men. But we engaged them in a process of innovating so that we could actually bring in the perspectives of all the different players. And then we worked with a company called Gearbox, who actually fabricated some of their crazy ideas, like this gun made from water pipes and a foot pump that shoots out balls of elephant dung, which are full of chili powder and lit so that they're smoking and fuming, and they can project them much further than anybody could throw them. We put up camera traps. We did all kinds of funny things, and I can tell you it's not easy. It's not easy to stop an elephant, and it's not easy to even put these things together. But the fact that people are working on it, and we're working with the communities, means that we're actually getting closer. And the reason why I believe that we will find really excellent solutions for this problem is because of Richard Turere, who I mentioned to you guys earlier. If any of you remember from last week's talk, I mentioned a young boy called Richard Turere, who is a pastoralist on the edge of Nairobi National Park. He's also a Maasai. Richard Turere invented an amazing device that is based purely on his observation that when he was looking after his cattle, the lions would stay away so long as he was walking around at night with a flashlight. If he put up lanterns or put up lights or a scarecrow, the lions would still come in and kill the cows at night. That meant he couldn't go to school because he was too tired. All he wanted to do was to go to school. So he devised this system of flashing lights that mimics somebody walking around the homestead. That simple device is now being used all over Africa. So Richard Turere, through that very simple invention that he made when he was 11, got noticed when he was 13, got him onto the TED stage in LA, where he spoke about his invention. Today he is the youngest patented innovator in Kenya. So, there's loads of things that we've been able to do as an organization at our level, maybe reaching the government officials, reaching into the communities and other partners like Save the Elephant. But I wondered what kind of things you would all be able to do to help. And I came up with a few ideas. You could write to congressmen or congresswomen, senators, political leaders to ban the ivory trade in your countries. In the US, the ban of ivory trade is only present in a few states. UK has just banned ivory trade. Hong Kong has banned ivory trade. China, amazingly, has banned the ivory trade. But in the US, there is still ivory trade in many of the states. You can engage influencers in these conversations, so some of you probably actually do know people who could make a difference. And you can also, of course, learn more, sign up for newsletters, find out more from other organizations. We carry quite a lot of information on our website. So it doesn't have to be somebody as high level as the First Lady of Kenya, Margaret Kenyatta, to make a difference. But having somebody like that as one of your champions is very powerful. I was recently in South Africa, and I mentioned to a group of people that, the amazing impact that she has had on children, on businesses, on the rest of government. And they said, but at that time it was Jacob Zuma. They said, you guys are so lucky because you only have one first lady. 17 first ladies. I was like, you're actually luckier than us. There were 17 people to go to. So there are plenty of opportunities out there for people to help. So with that, I just want to say thank you to all of you for listening to that presentation, and all of our donors who have made the work that we've done possible. It's very rare to have a campaign that is that successful over such a short time frame. And next week, I'll be telling you more about what we did after the success of this campaign. So before you go, though, and before we ask the question, I open it up for questions. I just want you guys to do another clicker question. So here it is. I'm going to start now. Okay. All right, let's see what he said. Okay. 28% said you make, well, 31% said make donations. 23% said you write to senators and Congress people. Only 2% said you'd start a fundraiser. 42% said you'd learn about more ways. Great. Thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate it. So we do have a few more minutes if anyone has any questions. Yes.
What's your opinion on the ban in the U.S. on importing ivory and speaking from New Zealand?
Very good question, actually. It's a big deal that the U.S. has recently lifted the ban on the importation of ivory from a southern African country. That was quite a big deal. And the ban on antiques is also very relevant. So I don't know if you all know, and I don't know how many of you have ever seen. How many of you have actually seen ivory? Has anybody actually seen what ivory looks like, right? So it's a really unique substance. There's only one animal in the world that makes the ivory the way elephants do, and it's very easy to tell elephant ivory apart from any other bone because it has an interesting spiral pattern on it. But it's also very easy to fake antique ivory. Well, it's a soft. It's made of dentine. It's kind of soft. You just soak it in tea, and it looks really old. And so, what was discovered in the U.S. Was that a lot of so-called antique shops in New York, in particular, were selling new ivory as old ivory, and it's not that difficult to tell because all you got to do is check the radioisotopes, and you can actually date ivory down to the last 2 years. And so it's very easy to figure it out. But who's going to be doing that? As a buyer, you walk into a shop, something looks nice, maybe it reminds you of something from when you were a kid. You're not going to start going and having it tested. You're going to think it must be true because it's on sale. And that's why, yeah, I mean, people think it can't be fraudulent, right? I mean, who would guess you'd buy fraudulent stuff in an antique shop in New York? That's what was happening. Tons and tons of ivory were pouring into New York in particular, but also in San Francisco, Hawaii, and other places. So the ban, I think an overall ban on trade in ivory just sends a very clear message. It just stops everything in its tracks. That's my personal opinion. Yeah.
Hi, so in, I think it was 89, the President Moy burned tons of ivory. I kind of want to know your opinion about that as a motivation, as a statement for people not to continue buying ivory or continue pushing for it. But also, would you think that that action impacts the spend on conservation?
Well, again, thanks for that. I know I rushed through that presentation because there's so much content that I could talk for hours about it. So the very first destruction of ivory was done in Kenya in 1989 by President Moy. 12 tons of ivory were burned in a very famous fire. Within a year, there was a global ban on ivory trade. That had a huge impact. It sent messages to people around the world. So where ivory was being used mostly was here in the United States and in Europe at that time. Japan was also a major market. And it was not being used for anything essential. It's literally billiard balls, hair combs, really nothing too essential. Plastic could do all that. But it sent a very clear message that buying a billiard board made of ivory or piano keys made of ivory was actually leading to the death of these fantastic, intelligent, compassionate animals. So it sent a very strong message. The ban on ivory trade worked elephant poaching across the continent, dropped very low level. The reopening of the ivory trade in so-called experiments in 2002 and again in 2008 resulted in this surge in demand, primarily in China. So you can imagine, if some ivory is legal, it sends a very weird, confusing message. How come it's legal there and it's not legal everywhere? And it was only from 4 Southern African countries, but how do you know that that ivory came from Southern Africa, not from East Africa or West Africa? It's impossible to tell as a layperson. The second destruction of ivory in Kenya, actually we've had 5 destructions now. The last one in 2016 was the largest ever anywhere in the world. That massive, I think there were, 5 or 6 massive fires of ivory that were burned, plus tons of rhino ones went up in flames and a whole bunch of other things. But the US has now destroyed their ivory. France, Hong Kong, China, loads and loads of places have started destroying their ivory in partnership or in agreement with this idea that as long as you're sitting on it, it's like seizing cocaine and saying, well, it is valuable, let's hold it. It's like, hold it for what? It's illegal, it's contraband already. Just destroy it. And so it's had a very, very strong impact all over the world, and that's why countries all over the world are destroying ivory. Yeah.
So last class you talked about how Kenya needs economic and industrialization, but also the wildlife and biodiversity is the heart of the place. So how do you see that happening?
That's a great question, and I had actually posted something on Facebook today about this. It really is a challenge. It's a big challenge. I don't see it as an impossible challenge, though. Wildlife will never pay its way as wildlife. You will never shoot enough animals to say that's going to be, hunting is going to save these animals. You'll never have enough tourists to make up for all the revenues that you require. There has to be a different value system around it. Some of it could be literally that if Kenya was to go down the route of let's use these things up and sell them, we would lose our national forests. We would lose our water. That would directly affect energy production. That would directly affect industry. So it's very clear from a government's perspective that don't touch those trees up in the mountains. Do not touch those forests, those national parks. And there's an enormous amount of effort on fencing off those parks and very, very high levels of enforcement because those water sources and those water catchments are vital for water, and also for agriculture in those areas, because the number one priority for Kenya is food security. So I think that is the way we have to preach it. We have to reposition our arguments and say, well, elephants are these phenomenal animals that require tens of thousands of square kilometers. By saving elephants, you have to save that landscape, which means you're protecting soil, water, energy, pollinators, and all kinds of other environmental services, including carbon sequestration. So I think that's how we're doing it. And I posted a comment on Facebook today, and the Minister for Wildlife, or Tourism and Wildlife, commented, which really surprised me. I didn't know he was watching my timeline. And I was commenting on my frustration around this problem, and I made some suggestions. I said, but look at what Canada's doing. Look at how the UK parks are funded from their national lottery. Why not? Why don't we have a national lottery and put that money into protecting our wildlife? Because we're never going to have enough visitors to go into our parks. Tourism goes up and down every time there's a terrorism threat collapses. So we need another reliable source of income. In Canada, every industry that's taking anything out of the ground has to pay a certain tax, and that tax goes into protected areas. That makes sense, You're taking stuff out. Why not put some amount of your revenue back into a pot that allows, if you're destroying biodiversity here, at least secure the biodiversity in another place. But let's not put roads and railways and dams inside our national parks, because we're just undermining the very asset that we say we're protecting. Anyway, he agreed with me, which is nice. Yeah.
To what extent would you say that poaching is caused by problems such as poverty and associated economic disparity, and have there been efforts to address the problem from that front as opposed to just imposing really heavy criminalization on it?
Yeah, great question. It's a very hard question. Obviously, if you're poor, and somebody comes along and says, I'll pay you $500 to show me where the rhinos are, we'll probably do it. I met a poacher in a place called Lewa in Kenya, and I sat with him. I took a photograph. There were some very negative reactions. He was smiling as he was telling me how he was reformed. But I was asking him, how did you get into poaching? What really happened? He said, well, I was so poor. My kids didn't have shoes. I was so embarrassed. All the other neighbors had at least shirts on their backs, and my kids were in tatters. And I met some Somalis, and they wanted to know where the rhinos were, and they were going to give me a little bit of money. So I went along with it, and then he showed them where the rhinos were. They killed the rhino, and he got a bit of money. They got a lot of money. And so he thought, well, why don't I kill the rhinos myself? And so he went off, got himself a gun, and went off and killed the rhino. And when I was talking to him, it made me realize that it really is one of those things that it's going to be very hard. There are social stigma in those communities. As a result of him poaching that rhino, he lost all his social networks. The community rejected him. He was booted out. Nobody would take his kids to hospital if they were sick. Nobody would bring their cattle anywhere near him. So he was rejected socially, which is a very, very difficult thing to do in an African rural area. So that's a very powerful motivator to keep people together, bound, because they depend on that social insurance. But poverty obviously is a big, big problem, and that's actually what's going on right now. The debate in Kenya is how you deal with people who live in those landscapes with those animals, who are actually paying for the cost of those animals. The animals are destroying their crops, they're injuring people, they're destroying their property. What do we do about those people so that they don't become poachers themselves? It's not a question that has an easy answer. It's going to take a while. But so what we do at Wildlife Direct, I'll talk about it a bit more next week, is really target social development. So a lot of conservation organizations do social development, schools, hospitals,